profoundly the interior energies of something. It is difficult to assume that all this influence is merely from the outside. We are not able at any moment to check this influence, but after a period of years we perceive it, and we are suddenly aware of a very subtle form of energy modifying the conditions under which we exist. The Greeks held to this concept also, and Plato's great cyclic year and his various periods of alternating fertility and sterility, by means of which the cultures of humanity are so profoundly affected. These observations remain true. The various phenomena which Plato described actually occur. But how shall we understand it? Not having a better explanation, is it conceivable that he could have been right, as he was in so many things? Could a man whose knowledge of politics, government, human philosophy, and religion be as profound as it was, and have survived so long to our admiration, been completely naive in something else of equal importance? It is hard to imagine that he could have been. And certainly we have no right to take it for granted. We must therefore at least make honest investigation. This brings us perhaps to one of our important psychological points, namely that as we know from the seasons that the energy availability differs at different parts of the year due to the inclination of the Earth's axis. We know that this is true because we can watch the coming of winter, and we can watch its disappearance again after the vernal equinox. We see the larger part of the Earth affected by this. We measure it in terms of human adjustment and non-adjustment. And today, parts of our eastern seaboard are blanketed in snow. We are not so blanketed here. Other parts of the world are now preparing for the glories of summer, such as our neighbors in Australia. These differences, we know, are due to astronomical phenomena. And we know that these differences affect the birth rate. We know they affect the death rate. And we recognize that untimely situations arising in the world's climate affect us economically, in the destruction of crops, affect us in the terms of health. Any physician will point out to you the seasonal epidemics. Also, we know the vulnerability of the sick, and we recognize that millions of people today are leaving extreme climates and gathering in our own delightful Southern California smog-infested atmosphere because they are tired of facing pneumonia every winter. This situation is obviously the result of a chemistry of universal factors. If the sun were not where it is, if the planets were not where they are, and if the earth was not in its present position among them, this entire group of circumstances would be totally changed. And man himself could do nothing about it. For in the presence of these elements, man as a person is hopeless and helpless. That these things, therefore, pound upon his outer life, we know. So we are presented at this time with two possible psychological schools of thought. One is that the effect of universal energy modifications upon man are due first to the effect upon his environment. There is no doubt that religions are the results of longitude and latitude. If the Finns had not lived where they lived, they would not have given us that beautiful classical religious mythological poem, the Kalevala. If the Hindus had not been exactly where they were, they would not have given us the peculiar interpretation of Hinduism that we have today. If the Japanese had lived somewhere else, or under different conditions, they would not have had the peculiar flowery arts with which we associate them. Thus, the distribution of climates may definitely and does certainly affect body structure, social adjustment, degree of activity. It has a strong effect upon ambitions, motivations, and upon the contemplative interior life of the person. Thus, if man is the result of the town in which he lives, the books he reads, the friends he meets, and the relatives he has accumulated, so he is also subject to the seasons, the weather, the climate, the terrain in which he exists. Mountain people are different from valley people. And it is quite conceivable that this vast, intangible atmosphere, which is actually constantly modifying our way of life, may also be moving in upon us as a psychological factor in our temperament and our disposition. Thus, merely the fact that the sun and the moon and the stars are in the sky has affected us. It has affected our religions, and in turn these have moved our living. The contemplation of the sunset affects man, whether we wish to say it is the sunset itself or the contemplation of it. May be a psychological point, but it has had its effect and has come down to us in the personification of the sunset in a whole cycle of gods and goddesses and heroes. These in turn have affected our moral lives. And to a measure, our moral lives are in continuous and stressful relationship with economic existence. These things affect. Consequently, if we wish to say that the universe produced the environment by which man is what he is, we are only making another statement of the power of universals upon the life of individuals. Now we know that man's actual existence, along with the existence of everything else that does exist, is due to participation in a life principle, that through man constantly something electric, magnetic, some strange life fluid essence pours and flows continuously. That in this essence also man has his existence, in the light and the air and space around him. For every part of himself that is tied to the earth, there are countless parts tied to space. We have become so accustomed to watch our feet and think of the solid earth beneath as a symbol of all reality, that we have forgotten that were we and are we separated from the space energies by which life is maintained, we will simply and do simply pitch forward upon the earth dead. Thus our lives come to us out of life itself. And how shall we observe or assume that life reaches us? Are we to follow with the ancients that believe that the life of man really originates in the living spiritual being that ensouls the planet? Or are we willing or more inclined to assume that it arises from the tremendous energy fields in which this planet floats, suspended itself by one of the greatest mysteries of energy and motion? Thus assuming, and we must assume, we have no choice, that our energies, by which we can lift a hand, read a book, take a step, that these energies are invisible but absolutely real, and that without these energies we have no achievement, no existence possible. We have the telephone, we have the instrument on the wall or on our desk, We know that it is tied with a mass of wires and a network of stations and substations to phones all over the world. Yet it's the current that moves within these wires and carries the message. Ceases, the telephone ceases to be important, although its physical structure remains undisturbed. It ceases to live. It is dead. Therefore, the energy which we cannot see is really a kind of divine power, and the instrument made for that energy is our acceptance of the reality of that power, and our desire to build a house for it, whereby it can live with us and serve us. But the instrument is the servant of the energy. Without the energy, the instrument is meaningless. And in the same way, the human body, about which we boast so much and so continuously, is an instrument. And without the energy that ensouls it, it is meaningless. It is unable to achieve any of the purposes for which it is intended. Now, we have not yet reached a point in popular thinking where it has occurred to us that this energy upon which we live may come to us in a conditioned form. We are fully aware that there are many energies in space, that there are planetary rays, solar rays, cosmic rays. We are now recognizing that we have a universe like a very intricately woven fabric, the very substances of this fabric being composed of energy, that this energy is subject to innumerable laws of its own kind, and that there is also various adjustments and conflicts between the laws of energy and the laws of matter. These facts are dimly coming to our attention. But now comes the greatest question that we know. This energy stream that sustains us, is it a pure unconditioned stream? Is there nothing between this life principle and body? If there is anything between, what is it? Is there some reason, some archetypal pattern governing the distribution of this energy according to laws, according to principles, according to values? If such government exists, in what is it posited? What is the universal machinery by means of which the specializations, diversifications of energy are possible? We know that the orderly progression of seasons means that this energy is subject to mutation. It is subject to being more or less available. We cannot say that the energy itself is more or less. But we do know that in a given area, at a given time, the energy allotment may be reasonably determined. That this allotment is not continuously identical with itself. That in some areas the allotment is greater than in others. And that this allotment is governed by laws of periodicity. Consequently, we have evidence, physical evidence, to prove that the flowing of this energy into form is subject to laws. That it is not just simply a great sea in which we all swim, but that it is a kind of ocean in which there are innumerable currents. And therefore, that because of the infinite diversity of the sea itself, in this case, it is able to sustain an infinite diversity of life. Studying this, the only answer that anyone has ever been able to advance, and Kepler probably did as well with it as anyone has, the only explanation to account for the control, regulation, systematic distribution of energy is the relationship between universal bodies. That just as surely as the comparatively insignificant inclination of the Earth's axis results in the vast phenomenon of seasons, that actually energy is specialized by relationship, and that it is not that the individual is nearer to it or further from it, but assumes various aspects in relation to it that constitute these